you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to YPO Presents Ask the Experts. I'm Mary Nazzal-Batayneh, a YPO member joining from Jordan. I'm currently a business owner of 3 different businesses, 17 ventures, Landmark Hotel, and Movement. And more relevant, I'm a brand ambassador for several sustainable and ethical fashion brands. So, really excited about this conversation today. We're joined by 2 amazing business leaders, Kathy Cheng and Simon Cotton, to discuss sustainable fashion. We're going to be discussing several points, including how brands and manufacturers are driving innovation, what consumer trends mean for the industry's future, and how leaders can make an impact. So, welcome, Kathy and Simon.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Nice to be here, Mary. Thanks.
So, Kathy, I know you're president at Redwood Classics Apparel in Toronto, one of Canada's leading full service apparel manufacturers. But rather than me introducing you, can you share a little bit more about your background and experience with our audience?
Yes, absolutely. So, as you had mentioned, we're a full service apparel manufacturer and we proudly produce everything on Canadian soil. And I think that's really quite the rarity given how much products are made offshore. So, 100% of what comes out of Redwood Classics is manufactured here in Toronto, Canada, locally. We're your typical immigrant family from Hong Kong, and we're competing against offshore factories, which is a bit of that irony. But we really help premium and retail brands and designer brands by focusing on quality, quick to market, and really flexible and collaborative approach in terms of product development as well as bulk production. So we see ourselves more of a servitized manufacturer as opposed to just a top-down manufacturer, very, very collaborative. And I think also because we really focus on our clients being business partners versus being a client and a label we make for, this allows them to focus on their core competencies where we believe we're able to execute effectively and efficiently. So I guess we try to be our specialists and allow our brand partners to be a specialist as well within their field.
Wow, thank you for sharing. Looking forward to digging deeper into your approach, which really sounds very unique. And hats off to everything that you're doing.
Thank you.
Simon, we know you're the CEO of McNaughton Holdings, one of Scotland's oldest and most respected textile companies. Can you also share a little bit about your background and experience before we jump into the conversation?
Yeah, well, the company here is 240 years old. I've not done 240 years of it, unfortunately. But I've been in the textile industry for 15 years, and I've gone from sourcing T-shirts in Bangladesh for 60 cents to making the finest cashmere in the world for the likes of Hermes and Chanel and Burberry. The company I'm running now is working in fine merino lambswool, predominantly for home interiors and for Highland wear, so kilts and all the bits that go with it to make up your traditional Scottish Highland wear. I was one of the founders of an organization called the Sustainable Fibre Alliance. We developed sustainable guidelines for cashmere herding in Mongolia and then China. And it's now, I would say, the leading body for sustainability in the Kashmir area. So that's a little bit of my history.
Wow. Well, even though it's not 240 years old, it sounds impressive already. So, for those of you who don't know, YPO is a global leadership community of more than 33,000 chief executives, like the executives we have with us today, in more than 142 countries, driven by the shared belief that the world needs better leaders. And one of the benefits of being a YPO member is the opportunity to connect with leaders like Kathy and Simon and have conversations around these deeper issues. So let's start by just setting some definitions. I mean, the 3 of us obviously are advocates for sustainable fashion, but I think a lot of the audience may not even understand what that means. They may not know the repercussions of fast fashion and what it does to the planet, not to mention labor standards. So, Kathy, just starting with you in terms of how you define sustainable fashion.
I actually have a two-prong approach to the answer. I would say as a fashion apparel provider, um, I think the
Mm.
apparel industry has rapidly grown. I look at kind of how I became my dad's business partner in 2009, and really we were driven by the purpose. As I'd mentioned before, we were immigrant family that came to Canada with absolutely nothing. My dad worked three jobs. My mom was a full time seamstress as well, and I was a latchkey kid at the age of 5, because we just didn't we couldn't make ends meet. Having said that, my dad started the small sewing facility in 1988 with 5 people and 10 machines. And the reason why I'm sharing this history, I think it's
Mm-hmm.
important because it really helped us shape our guiding principles of where we are today. And we've been manufacturing on Canadian soil for over 30 years now. Having said that, I think what has happened is, with fast fashion, when I became my dad's business partner in 2008, it was in the midst of fast fashion. But what had happened in the history of our factory is we went from 5 people and 10 machine to the late 90s, and we were directly employing close to 500 people, 50,
Wow.
all made
Mm-hmm.
in Canada, all local. And I think when I reflect back, the what I'm most proud of, and again, it's helped us shape our guiding principle, was being from Hong Kong. And during the late 90s, there was the take back of Hong Kong from the British colony. So in 1997, and textile years ago in Hong Kong was a textile hub. So when 1997 happened and close to the late 90s, we had a huge influx of Hong Kong immigrants and the skill
Mm-hmm.
and the knowledge base that actually immigrated to Canada. And so I look at our growth, and a big part of that has been through immigration and through the ability of supporting our growth. Now, 2001, China joins WTO, quotas get lifted, and we see a quick demise in production in Canada. And really, the textile industry in North America, not just Canada, really has dissipated. Um, and also, if you recall, 2008 was also the financial recession, right? The global financial recession. So, being an apparel manufacturer in Canada, let's just say we were not the most attractive business. And we were left with a business decision and a family decision. Do we retire like most textile families have in North America, or do we continue to fight this battle? And the truth of the matter is, it was, my dad asked me to be his business partner. I selfishly actually didn't really want to. I'm an only
Mm-hmm.
child, and the factory has been, it's taken, and as a family business, it's really taken a lot of the energy of us. But I remember what I call an aha moment. And I was on the production floor. Word got out we may not be around anymore. And I don't know if it was the feeling that I had or it was just in my mind, but I felt a huge sense of emotion that was on the production floor,
Mm-hmm.
amongst the humming of the machines. And it just hit me like a ton of brick. And I was like, oh my God, like I have to do this. I thought back about how we came with absolutely nothing. And I've had the education that I've had the life that I've had because of our family of makers. So in 2019, January, I became my dad's business partner, and we humbly restructured with 40 people, 40. And so that in itself was really powerful for, as our business was growing, to really focus on slow fashion. And we felt that there was a real niche in the marketplace, that there were either really big volumes and fast fashion, but there wasn't that much focus on the slow fashion approach, right? Which was to take our time, use quality materials, employ talented craftspeople, pay them living wages, and focus on reducing the environmental footprint of our textile factory, which is exactly
Mm-hmm.
what we've kind of done. So, I think our philosophy, which combines our enduring value of quality and workmanship and sustainable innovation, is helping us kind of recreate a or rebuild a thriving, hopefully North American supply chain.
I love this. I mean, you answered the question by really bringing out the values and the purpose that your family business has had from the very beginning. And despite numerous sort of shocks, either to the financial system, you were also opportunistic at a point, taking in these immigrants that have the skills that you mentioned, and then expanding, and then realizing you need to um, contract a little bit, but still remaining true to your values. That's such a beautiful story. And then at the end of the answer, you really defined what I also consider to be, sustainable fashion. Just the thoughtfulness, that intentionality that you bring to every item that you produce. And also ensuring that everyone within your team are treated, with fair sort of label standards and human rights. So thank you so much for answering the question by taking us through your journey and where you are at the moment. Thank you, Kathy. Simon, turning to you again, just setting those definitions for the audience. So, what is your definition of sustainable fashion?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the first thing is it's such a broad field and there's so many different components to it that it's really
Mm,
difficult for anything at all to be called truly sustainable. I mean, it's there's
Agreed.
so many topics. So typically the big ones are energy. Textiles, massive user of energy, water consumption, chemical pollutions, plastics, microplastics, and microplastic pollution, but plastic usage in general. You've got a lot of human issues, which Kathy touched on, and the global supply chains are have massive problems around labor. Historically, a lot of child labor, unfair wages, forced labor practices, a lot of issues to deal with. So you can easily, depending on how you divide them up, you can easily get to 10 to 20 different topics that you need to address if you're going to try and call yourself a sustainable brand. And even then, you'll probably miss bits or have little components where you don't fully understand the supply chain for something, and you've got to go in and look at that a little bit later. So I do think it's a journey, not a destination. You've got to be
mm,
constantly working at it, constantly improving, and you shouldn't forget the consumption aspect, because when Kathy's making really good quality product that lasts a long time, that is really reducing the carbon footprint of that product versus something which is cheap and disposable and will need to be remade, or something else
mm.
will have to come out in a few months' time. So it is really important to look at every single aspect of this sort of multi-dimensional puzzle. And I find it endlessly fascinating and challenging.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I'm wondering, sort of in terms of standards, you mentioned that you are part of the Fiber Alliance um, organization. So, are there particular standards that members have to follow to be part of that alliance?
Yeah, I mean that standard deals with particularly cashmere production. So it was
Mm,
a group of industry players, manufacturers, brands who came together to try and support herders, goat herders in Mongolia to start with, in developing the sustainability of their grasslands. So that was dealing with issues around desertification, issues around animal welfare, etc., and then looking at how you can trace that and how you can build that through supply chains. Because typically textile supply chains aren't very transparent. You buy raw materials on the open market. You don't know where it's come from. You don't know what's gone into it.
mm,
And we are trying to re-engineer all that so that not only could you trace it back to where it came from, but you could say how produced place was in line with standards that we'd set. And of course, every brand wants to have slightly different standards, so you're having to pull everybody together and get some fairly major players to work together and agree together on what's fair. So a lot of challenges to it. And in Mongolia, obviously, one of the biggest challenges is because the land isn't owned; it's free
mm.
grazed. You've got to get communities to work together, because otherwise one person reduces their herd size to help the grassland, and the other person increases it, and nobody's won. But the person who's doing the right thing has lost out. So there's a lot of things that you have to do even to just deal with that one part of the problem.
Yeah, yeah, and that's just
If
part of it. As you mentioned, Kathy, you're laughing. Go ahead.
if I just may chime in, Simon, absolutely agree with you that it is a journey and not a destination. And sometimes it irks me because I wish people would just say, like, we're not a
Mm,
sustainable whatever. Like, we're all achieving and we're all doing our best. I often say, unless we don't live, we are going to destroy the earth. I think what we're all trying to do, and what I personally try to do, and we hope to do with our business, is how do we minimize the impact? how do we slow down the impact? But it is bound to happen to some degree. At least maybe that's just me being very, I don't know. That's just, I'm just, anyways,
Yeah.
that's what I feel. But also, Simon, you had mentioned that every brand has different standards. I absolutely agree with you because we make for so many different global brands. It is very challenging. And what you shared was from a fiber standpoint, from a raw material standpoint. Now, as a manufacturing standpoint, the fashion industry is just such a huge supply chain and there's so many elements involved. Even as a manufacturer, that's part of our challenge is what standards, because within 1 week, and we will often have um, unannounced factory audits, which is absolutely fine. But within 1 week, we could score perhaps high 70s with the first one and perhaps score high 90s. And it's not like my factory
Mm.
changed overnight. It's not like my policies changed overnight, but it's because of the different requirements of the brand. So, I mean, in my perfect world as an apparel manufacturer would be if we could just have a gold standard and all brands follow it. It would make our lives a little bit easier.
Mm. But how much do you think that consumer demands are reflected on what the brands are requiring? Like, I think there is a change with the younger generation, and as we become more conscious as to the impact of fashion, that consumers are demanding different types of products. But is that trickling down yet to the brands? Have you seen that?
Me, I
Well,
have.
sure. Yeah. Go ahead,
I
Kathy.
have seen that, and perhaps we're maybe jumping around a little bit, but one of the things that we started as a brand and as a factory 8 years ago is Factory Friday. So every Friday, hashtag across our social media platforms, we're showcasing things that has happened for the week. So that's our way of being transparent. And over the years, what we have found that our demographics have become younger and younger. We're able to find this through, as we're tracking the digital clicks and everything else of what we've been doing. Um, so I do believe it's being driven by it, but part of the challenge is the supply chain is quite large. It's very
Mm,
complex. And I feel like different brands are taking different approaches. And it's not always a holistic approach because and it also is consumer driven as well. Consumers say they want it, but really we can all vote with our dollars. And we're just not seeing quite that there yet. Um,
mm,
so I do find a little bit of disconnect where there are consumers that say they want it, and then there are consumers that are willing to invest in it.
mm. Yeah,
So,
no, I agree. I mean, I think, like for me, it's funny, I was reflecting on this the other day because I do support slow fashion. I'm an investor in sustainable fashion. I'm a brand ambassador. And then I found myself in Zara buying clothes for my kids. And then I said, what are you doing here? And it was simply because there isn't an alternative, at least in Jordan, for kids' clothing. And so I started asking my friends, where are you buying your kids' clothes? Like, I don't want to go to H&M and Zara. Like, I don't buy it for me. Why should I buy it for my children? But it's just not available yet.
mhm.
So, I mean, there's a lot of work that, needs to be done. I guess we're at the beginning of this. I want to go back, Simon, because you're right, Kathy, we did jump around a bit. Um, Simon, you were talking about sort of energy, water, the carbon footprint. So I think a buzzword that we tend to hear in the industry is this idea of circularity, right? And maybe we can both, all of us kind of speak to that. Simon, if you can go ahead. How is your business kind of incorporating circularity?
Yeah, so I mean, I brought this business 9 months ago, so we're quite early on this
Mm,
particular journey. Obviously, in my last company, we were doing a lot around cashmere and recycling and take back schemes, etc. We've got our first range incorporating recycled fiber coming out in a few months' time.
mm,
But to be honest with you, I think the best thing you can do with a garment is make it last, make it good quality, make it. We make. Traditional Scottish kilts are passed down from father to son for generations. They go on forever, and at the end of their life, they're pure wool, so they biodegrade. So, compared to stripping a garment apart and making it into a new garment, that's a much more energy efficient, chemical efficient, resource efficient way of doing things. So I think when we talk about circularity, we always think about, garment to fiber, post-consumer waste being recycled into things, and we're a long way away from that being something which is viable at scale, because clothes are so cheap to make, so disposable, that it's very difficult to remake them for anything like the original cost. So there's a lot we can do, but it really starts with making sure that the garments that you've got last as long as possible. When they wear out, you repair them. When they don't fit you anymore, somebody else gets them. All that stuff. We need to consume a lot less. That's the biggest part. And recycling at the end of life is really, it's part of the answer, but it's the last stage. It's the last option.
Right, right. And I agree with you. When you see upcycling efforts, they tend to be very niche, and it's very difficult for them to be at the scale that we need. So there's two brands actually that I represent that are upcycled brands. One of them is called Lumeo. So it takes old sweaters like this kind and goes back to sort of the fibers, and then makes bags and carpets and yoga mats in the Wadi Rum desert, sort of employing Bedouin women to upcycle sweaters into bags and so on. And there's another local brand called Salad, which takes men's suits and then makes like cool little, vests and things like that for women's skirts. I mean, so many different types of things. But again, it's not at scale, like it's not mass. And so, like you said, we just need to stop consuming that much. Kathy, do you want to speak a little bit about circularity?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I do agree with Simon. It is very labor intensive. It is very resource intensive, and absolutely, it is very niche. But that's
Mm,
also the approach that we've been taking. We also manufacture a private label for a brand called Pre Love. It's a boutique brand that has been taking. We've actually helped them scale to a niche, so that they could wholesale and to a niche market. Um, and we've been doing that for close to 20 years. So even the jacket, as an example, that I'm wearing right now, this is actually upcycled with old curtain textiles.
mm,
So it's how do we, but so they're small collections, they're boutique collections. It's not necessarily as a fast fashion type of scalability, but we've also, I believe that's part of the solution, as Simon had mentioned. It is not the most resource friendly to the sense of the time, labor, and all of that other stuff. But then
mm,
for us, when we're looking at sustainable fashion or just circularity or just like really, I look at fashion and how we're trying to approach our business, and it's more of the ESG effect, right? Like from an environmental, social, and a governance. So sustainability is
mm,
how does it continue, in my humble opinion. Um, and so that's why we're guided by our three principles, our three P's, which is people, planet, and profit, and being
mhm,
very, very upfront in that we need to have that profit, because I cannot create jobs if I do not have profit. The fact that we're made in Canada, we're very close. I'd say more than 50% of what we manufacture is exported outside of Canada, but really to our neighbors down south. And that is also minimizing the carbon footprint.
mm,
We're a boutique niche premium manufacturer. We're not going to be that factory that is going to churn over. We can scale, but more than likely, because of by nature of the brands that we have in our portfolio and we've really nurtured over the years, we believe
mm,
we're a solutions provider for a brand that is in an inflection point. Perhaps they're an entrepreneur, they're starting off, and then now they can meet our low minimums. Then how do we scale together? Because at some
mm,
point, hopefully, we're going to get less of this, but we've seen time and time again in history and how brands are scaling. They're going to scale to a certain point, then they will start to have to focus on margins. And then with the margins, they have to take away from the product, right, in order to hit margins, because your consumers are asking for it. So I think consumers actually are so they have such a huge hand in driving this, but really fully understanding what they're asking for. It
mhm,
doesn't have to be
mhm,
so extreme. Is it organic everything? Or really understand where's the country of origin, where it's coming from, where the fibers are, what is the impact impact of that fiber, or even if we are upcycling. Another example I'm going to give you, and this is something that Redwood Classics, our wholesale brand, the factory and the wholesale brand also services the branded merchandise industry, which is a sleepy industry. It's a $25 billion industry. And so what I often think is if we want to make impact, not only is it based on one consumer, but it's also on the corporations, right? It's called conscious consumption in my view. And every corporation is spending money. They're putting their brand on something. So what if we try to mobilize and affect environmental impact and ESG impact through corporation and what their buying power is, and not necessarily just based on that one person? Think about events. Think about all these, you go to trade shows. Instead of giving out uh, I don't know, a tote bag that you'll probably never use or a t-shirt that you're going to wear once. How about we invest in it? Because there's an ROI for it. There's an ROI because from a branding standpoint, your logo lasts for a long time, right? You're getting that impression. That's why they're doing branded merchandise. And then from a different perspective is, as Simon said, the product's going to last for a long time and it'll be in your closet. So not only are you extending your ROI in terms of dollar per impression, but you are also extending the life of the product in which it will continue to be in a closet for years and years to come.
No, absolutely. I think, prioritizing on corporate behavior is key. There's one social enterprise that I've been mentoring in Egypt that makes these bags from plastic, and now they're making clothes as well from plastic. And their market is purely B2B, giveaways, and they're doing an amazing job. There was one thing that came to mind as you were both speaking, which I'm curious to hear your opinions on. Are companies like Pangaya, where they're growing different types of fabrics in the lab? So the founder of Pangaya, I know her very well, and I know they're using different types of bacteria and seaweed and all these types of organisms to grow leather and so on. So I'm just curious if you, Simon, maybe you have an opinion on that, and then maybe Kathy.
Yeah, I mean, I think what they're doing is fantastic. I'm very excited about what's happening in alternative fibers. There's not a lot of scale yet in terms of those type of things, but it's coming. And there are materials like linen and wool, which have got good qualities, which are available at scale. But a lot of exciting work done on that. And interestingly, it is micro businesses who are driving it. It's very difficult for the large businesses to engage in this area. It's a lot of work. It's very, very complex research. And of course, as soon as a big brand gets involved in, they're wondering when they can put it down the runway. And actually, this is research phase. This is early stage stuff. So, I mean, the people at Pangaya will say themselves, they're finding their way. They're developing early stuff, and they're at the start of what will be a very long journey, but a very important journey for the whole industry.
And I think what's interesting about them, I saw their latest product, which is a shoe that's printed using one material. So when it comes to sort of upcycling or recycling, it becomes much easier because it's basically one material. Kathy, do you have any comments on
Yeah,
lab grown fibers?
I think it's absolutely very exciting, as Simon said. Perhaps because by the time the product comes to us, it becomes we're full service, so we're an FOB factory. Cost still becomes an issue, right? I'm totally excited for it. We're welcoming it. The one thing I hope that we will see more of as these micro businesses and innovation happens, that we're a bit more transparent, and it's a fine line, because it's so exciting that it's a fine line that it doesn't come off as it's a mythical solution to plastic. I think that's really important because often when something new and exciting comes out, it's based on coffee, based on bamboo. Then t- there's always it's a credit and debit, right? It's a yin and yang. For any positive things that we're doing, there will be arguments that says, well, it's not as sustainable because of XYZ. So I think it's really important that any innovation that is considered sustainable, that is coming to the marketplace, that the brands are very transparent. And as indicate that it's a journey. It's not the end all. It's not a magic bullet, and
Yeah, and I think, yeah, we just have to look
it's
at
not
things
a
so
mythical
holistically.
solution to our problem right now.
Right. Simon, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, we can look at things like lyocell, so tree wood pulp made into fibers. It's a great idea, and done the right way can be incredibly, carbon positive and all the rest of stuff. But done the wrong way, you're planting lots of forests with very little biodiversity. There's been huge issues around wildfires, etc. And so we just got to be careful, as Kathy said. There's a tendency to sort of embrace an idea and sort of pump that idea out there and say, we've got it. This is it. But it's anytime you see that, anytime you see somebody making the claim that this is the answer, they're
Hmm.
probably exaggerating. To be honest with you, there's not one answer that's going to solve this. It's a lot of very, very hard work.
Yeah, and there's so many moving pieces. It's so complex. I mean, we talked about supply chain, which I'd like to get to in a minute. But before going there, do you feel that there's a level of impact washing that could be taking place within the fashion industry where people really are not having the impact that they are purporting to have? And there's some level of greenwashing or impact washing happening already? Simon?
I don't think there's some level. I think there's a massive level. I mean, I think we're most of the claims made are the difficulty is there is not one verifier of the truth. So there's lots of different versions of the truth, different standards, different things that you could be measured on. I can say, okay, well, I'm using natural materials. That's fantastic, but some of those natural materials have a high carbon footprint because they're coming from animal production systems. So what am I going to choose to talk about? I'll talk about natural materials. If I've got a factory like I do in an area of low water consumption, I'll talk about that. But what about the other things that are going on there? So because there is no one objective truth here, it's not necessarily that brands lie, but they choose which bits to talk about, and they talk about the good bits and they ignore the bad bits. And that is the overwhelming industry. It's not one part of the industry. That's what we do as an industry. We talk about what we like to talk about and we ignore the bad stuff. And there's a lot of bad stuff there.
Well, you heard it straight from Simon. He said it. I didn't. Coming straight live, YPO experts saying it as it is. Kathy, do you want to comment on that?
Very much. I agree with Simon. It is, I think, to be transparent and recognize again that it's a journey. We are all going to take different steps, but at least hopefully we're all working towards the same goal and destination, which is to minimize and slow down the destruction of Earth.
Hmm. I suppose one standard that is out there, which I personally am excited about, is the B Corp standard. So, this company that I've been part of for, I think, almost 10 years now, it's called the Social Enterprise Project. And we employ women in the poorest refugee camp in Jordan to do embroidery on bags and home, cushions, cashmere, like I mentioned before. And it's Jordan's first B Corp. I don't know. Do you think that B Corp is a certification that could be relevant to sustainable fashion companies?
I think B Corp is great for consumer level.
Mm,
For consumer level companies, it's when you look at actual full service manufacturing and then going down into the supply chain, and it's such a complex production system with so many actors that that it can become quite challenging. I
sure.
think it's great that there are standards out there, and it's just like any other certification, right? So, as an example, I'm very proud to be a women-owned certified business, but that's also with a third party council, or we are also a internationally recognized. Person of color, Canadian Aboriginal Minority Supplier Council, supplier diversity. That's another type of certification. I think there's great certifications out there. If we're looking for, again, I think B Corp is great, but is it the silver bullet? I don't quite think so yet, um,
Mhm.
because there is just so many variables that are required, and because the supply chain is driven by brands that do have different standards. And
Mm,
part of the
mm,
standards, and the frustration we often feel, and we're seeing the change now in the health and safety compliant and the social compliance audits, is that brands are finally starting to localize the results. So,
mm.
as an example, um, we would have points deducted because we do not have a full time security card in a fenced facility of our factory. Well,
Mm.
we're not in a third world country. When you make in Canada, we've got 3 levels of governance. I've got federal governance, I have, provincial governance, I also have municipality. And they're very strict requirements from an environmental standpoint, from a human rights standpoint, from a labor law. There's just so many things. So that's why I'm often, you know, s- encouraging people to look at the country of origin as well.
Yeah, it's so context specific. I mean, you're talking about a fence in Canada, and Simon was talking about Mongolian fields. Like, it's a completely different context. Simon, do you want to comment on certification, or should we jump into supply chain
No,
issues?
I'd love to talk about that. I mean, I'm quite biased on it because I took my last company to applying for B Corp, so we're still waiting for the certification to hopefully be verified. Because they're a large company, and for large companies, it takes an awful lot longer, and the standards are an awful lot higher than for smaller companies who can move through that much faster. But I think Kathy's right. It's difficult for one standard to do everything. I think B Corp is the best multi-product, multi-market general standard that's out there. But there's anomalies. We live in an area here where water stress is not an issue whatsoever. So we know that we're putting pure water back into the water system, so we don't focus on that particularly. Whereas in another country, we would have to look at water very, very carefully, and it would be a big issue within our textile production. So it's very difficult for a standard to reflect that and reflect the different things that are important to different companies in different parts of the world. But I think B Corp is the best. We spent a lot of time looking at what were the right standards to get, and for me at the moment, the B Corp is the most credible. But there's still work to be done.
Yeah, well, I'm glad I brought it up, and it took us a while too, being Jordan's first B Corp. But best of luck on that certification. Let us know once you get it. I mean, as I'm hearing both of your stories, I think you're so well placed to take the audience through the journey of the item. So that's the supply chain issue. Um, so I think, can you just speak about that? Maybe starting with you, Simon, from the farmers who grow the materials to workers who harvest the materials to manufacturers and delivery. It's such a complex chain. It would be amazing to add some color to it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, for the last few decades until very recently, as brands, we all sat in our offices, in the markets we consume in, and made decisions about where things were going to be made and how things were going to be made. We never visited, or we visited less and less the factories that produce them. We certainly didn't visit the agricultural workers and the raw material suppliers. And we knew very little about our supply chains, and that's having to change very quickly. It's very difficult for brands to do. It involves a lot of resource, it involves a lot of time, and you've got to lean into it and work for a long time before you can start making claims. The expectation of a brand is we'll send a team off to China or wherever, and they're going to come back with a raft of claims and statements that we can make. But that's not how it works. You've really got to engage in these supply chains in a big way. And actually, the way we set up brands, that we're going to, develop a brand and we're going to make every single product in the world, that doesn't lead to good supply chain management. Brands which are focused around a particular type of supply are much, much easier to manage from that point of view. But because we've had this arm's length approach for as I say, for decades, we think that we can have brands with thousands upon thousands of product categories in them, and can manage all those and manage every subcomponent within them, and have something which is truly sustainable. And actually, we've got to re-engineering our whole business models to make this work, because you've really got to start with the supply chain, start with what you can make and how you can manage it properly, and then come back to the consumer. Whereas, we've been focused on, let's start with the consumer and work out what they want and find somewhere to buy it. Well, that doesn't work.
I mean, I want you to answer that question, Kathy, but I'm just wondering, like, how much is it the responsibility of leaders like yourselves to educate the consumer on why these things are important and why maybe the additional cost is justified? I mean, how much consumer education do you think you need to be doing?
I think there's a huge amount for us to do as brands, manufacturers, but it's so hard for consumers to work through the complexity of these issues, the different claims, the different standards. I do think there's a big job for brands. There's a big job for the standards authorities to coalesce and to take out all these multiple standards that Kathy's been talking about. And I do think we're going to need legislation. We're going to need legislation to cut through some of this because, to be honest, the way we're going at this today is not going fast enough. We're not cleaning up this industry in anything like the speed that we need to. So it's going to take a lot of different things to come together. But there are some things consumers straight away can do a number of things. They can stop consuming so much. They can stop buying stuff and put it in the wardrobe and never wearing it. They can stop clicking that button that says deliver in next day, because that means your product's going to get air freighted and it's going to double the carbon footprint in a lot of cases. So there's a lot consumers can do without having to understand where every button's made, every zip's made. You do start with buying less, buying better, cutting down your consumption. You can do more in that than I can do from a factory point of view.
Yeah, and it's so simple. And I think maybe consumers just need to know that fast fashion is the third most polluting industry, as most say in the world. And then from that standpoint, okay, what can I do? Don't buy that item. It's as easy as that. So
Yep.
thank you, Kathy. Going back to you, if you want to speak to the previous point and then maybe speak about supply chains, please go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Simon's hit everything. He's pretty much said
Right.
a lot of things that I wanted to say. But I would like to highlight where Simon did mention collaboration. It is so, so key. So one of the things is, as much as I do believe there needs to be a more gold star standard for factory compliance and all of those other things, um, I also welcome the audits because it is an approach for us to be educated. I just wish it was a little bit more humanized. And this is where it becomes very challenging, right? If you work with the right brand partners, then they will recognize you are a great factory. You have all the good intention. Now, how are we investing in each other? I may be investing through raw material and taking an over position on inventory of raw material, so then I can support you for short runs and for quick turns and all of that. But as a brand, how are you investing in us as a supply chain partner to level us up so then we are kept up to date on things as well? It's a two-way approach. I don't think it's fair to say it's only your responsibility, it's only your responsibility. It's all of our responsibility. And similarly, just as, Simon had mentioned, buy well-made products, right? Stop clicking and returning, because they're like the brands and the retailers also have a sense of responsibility, and I think they should be responsible because we have fed into the machine of easy return so much that as a consumer, especially when you're buying online, I can buy 10 items, try all of them on, and return all 10. So not only is it the price of it and supporting the fast fashion, but making it so easy for people to return, and it's just adding to the carbon footprint.
So what about like thrift shops? So in Jordan, we have a couple of thrift shops, like some are for more upscale and some are more mass. Do you think that there's an increasing trend for people to buy secondhand?
I
Simon?
I I personally do.
Yeah, you do.
I
Okay.
do. So when we look at the brand partners that we actually manufacture for, a number of them actually are, you can find their products And perhaps on a retail level, it is more on the premium side, but then we're seeing the reselling of the products in secondary markets like StockX or on Grailed or, whatnot. And so I think there is an appreciation for the quality of the product. And, you could say, oh, maybe because it's streetwear, it's driven by luxury. Fair enough. But another market that we also serve is the independent schools. So in independent schools, school uniforms, well, we have found that I didn't realize this, but a friend of mine had told me, oh, I know your brand. Why do I know your brand? And they said, oh, because my daughter's school also buys from Redwood Classics. And so she said when they grow out of the product and time again, these independent schools are asking for the product because they recognize that the product is actually outlasting the growth of the child, where typically in some of the, let's say, school uniforms, because they're looking for price point, they're buying products, the kids have not outgrown it, but instead they've outgrown in terms of wearing it. And so now there's a secondary market, there's a third market for school uniforms. So just to taking it out of fashion per se, but more of a practical use, that's where we have found.
I love that. It's all about scale. That's an amazing idea. Simon?
Yeah, this whole sort of reuse concept has gone from being something about saving money to now obviously saving the planet. I was involved in a group called the Sustainable Markets Initiative, which was set up by Prince Charles, King Charles now, because he's been recycled now, which is good. And
Upcycled, upcycled.
exactly, yeah, yeah. And we worked on a standard labeling system or identification system for luxury goods so that they could be then reused, and also at the end of the life cycle they could be recycled. So luxury brands are concerned obviously that if they're going to resell something, they want to make sure it is actually genuine and authentic, so they need to improve their authentication processes, but also be able to say, this is what's gone into that product, and therefore, if you need to disassemble it at the end of its life cycle, this is the materials that you need to take account of. So if you buy a Mulberry handbag, if you buy a Chloe dress, then now you'll have these tags on it which say where it was made, what it was made for, what the components were, what the materials were, and that it is a true, authentic product, and therefore you can resell it either on their platform or, because it's a common standard, on a common platform, on a third-party platform. So there's all these sort of practical problems to resolve, but I think it's positive that the industry is working on them and working on them across brands. It's just not happening fast enough, that's all.
Yeah, like you said, I think legislation is the next step, to move things along quickly. I'm just wondering, as I'm listening to you both, whether you could, just stepping out of the sort of fashion sphere for a moment. I mean, you're both dealing with complex industries. Obviously, you're both leaders in the field and you're doing things differently with that intentionality and effort. I'm just thinking, could you give some advice to entrepreneurs that are looking to build their businesses vis-a-vis sustainability, number one, and just mindset generally? I mean, this is not easy to be doing what you're doing. Kathy, maybe starting with you, some advice that you could share.
I think just start having the intent. Um, I think sometimes I think just starting and also recognizing that you are part of the problem and you're part of the solution. In this sense, I'm a true believer in conscious consumption. And Mary, thank you for sharing earlier. You went to Zara. Like, you know what? I am not perfect. No one is perfect. We're all humans. So I think if we are making conscious consumption decisions within the means and with the ability, with the intent, I think that's very, very important. So perhaps I'm not buying everything organic, and perhaps I am buying leather here because that's my choice of value. Maybe I believe it's going to last longer. I think what's really important is that we don't shame ourselves and we don't shame, how do I put it? I think there's an element of self-governance and self-respect and recognizing that we are on a journey and we're doing the best that we can. But it's that conscious consumption that shows whether or not you're doing the best that you can. And as I'd mentioned before, from the way a corporation, you know, votes with their dollars. If I'm going to buy a product that is, let's say, women-owned certified, because we believe that they are marginalized, and there's an opportunity for us to uplift other marginalized communities through the way that we're spending the dollars. Like, I look at our business, and we went from 40 people in 2009 to we're over 100, and we published an impact report, a Made in Canada 10-year impact report a couple of years ago. We were able to aggregate that within our total value chain, we've created 302 jobs. Well, what is the socioeconomic impact of that? So I think looking at making a conscious consumption from a business perspective, but also from a consumer perspective.
Kathy, though, in terms of just more advice on the sustainability side, because you just mentioned that you're reporting, did you have to bring in any outside experts to help you with your impact management and measurement strategy and document it, or was that something that you could do internally?
We definitely did. We did. I think often, especially small businesses, one of the motivation and why we actually even published an impact report was, as an SME, I think often because, and Simon had hit on it, what started off as saving money ended up being, more of a sustainable approach. And I think a lot of SMEs or a lot of businesses are actually probably already doing it and saving money with the intent, perhaps saving money, but ended up being, oh, you know what? I'm also minimizing the carbon footprint, or I'm, minimizing the impact. I think what's really important is entrepreneurs also approach it not necessarily as a big mountain to climb, but more of look at internally in your processes. What are the things that you have done, or what are the things that you are doing that is actually more sustainable or taking you towards that journey that is reducing the damage? And it doesn't always have to be the biggest thing, right? Take it down to little chunks. That's how I would do it. So, as another example, because we ship directly into distribution centers, instead of buying brand new boxes, we're buying seconds. We're buying, secondhand use boxes that are still in great condition, or they're misprinted. Well, that's one way. I still have to ship them in boxes, but that's one way of minimizing landfill instead of going into recycling. And we encourage all of, whatever when we send out our boxes, we're encouraging others. And even internally here, when you buy from us on ecom, you get random boxes. Why? Because we're encouraging our team members to actually, if they've bought online, to bring back their boxes so then we can reuse them here at the factory. But those are little things, right? So I just wanted, my advice isn't, big and elaborate, but it's more of what can we all do that are simple and that are approachable immediately.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. It's the small things that also count. And like Kathy said, just get started, be intentional about it, and look at the small things. Simon, advice for entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I think it's true on any sustainable product now, whether it's clothing or food or a drink or whatever you're doing. I think you've got to start really, really narrow from a product point of view, because it is going to be hard. It's going to be hard to get into that supply chain, understand every component, understand any stage. And actually, if you can tell 1,000 little stories about that product rather than one story about 1,000 products, you're going to be more successful because the consumer is going to engage with that. And you can avoid those minefields where you talk about this and then somebody discovers this, and then your whole strategy is blown up. So I would say focus really, really tightly. Be prepared that it's going to be an awful lot of work. There's no shortcuts here. It's about really getting your sleeves rolled up and getting into the factories and understanding how things are made. But also, you've got a huge advantage as a new entrant in, because you don't have all these legacy issues that the existing brands and suppliers have that you've got to get out of. So because you're re-engineering it from the start, there is actually an advantage there. So I wouldn't be despondent about the opportunity, but you've got to be prepared to work hard.
No, that's great, honest advice. Thank you. So, on that note, I just like to thank Simon and Kathy for joining us. That was really, really valuable, and keep up the amazing work. So, the audience, you've heard it. straight from the horse's mouth. It's about the power of choice. It's about buying less. It's about reusing. And it's about asking about the environmental and social impact of the product that you're buying. And it's really about being conscious about these everyday choices that you make. For your home, for what you wear, for your children, for what car you drive, with how you live your life. So thank you so much for everyone who tuned in today. And if you enjoyed this episode, please do share it with your friends. And don't forget to follow YPO on all the social media networks. So I'm Mary, and this is YPO Presents Ask the Experts. Thank you so much for watching.
Thank you. Thank you.